looked at the clock. It was 4:44. You ignored it. 3 days later, you opened your banking app. The balance was 4,444 Rs. You found it funny. A coincidence. Then the number appeared on the license plate of a car in front of you in traffic, in the number of an apartment you were considering renting, in the numbering of an online order, in the follower count of a profile you just stumbled upon by chance, and then you searched it on Google. And what did Google give you? Page after page saying the same thing. Angels, spiritual guardians, a message that you are protected, that the universe is with you, that everything will be fine. But there is a serious problem with this explanation. A problem that spiritual YouTube channels do not want you to notice, because if you do, you will stop consuming their content. The problem is this. This explanation says absolutely nothing. It comforts you, reassures you, and leaves you exactly where you were before you saw the number. What if 444 is something completely different? What if the true explanation, the only explanation that withstands philosophical, mathematical, and historical scrutiny, is kept in a text written before Christ, a text that the Vatican tried to destroy, that medieval alchemists copied by hand in secret, that the Rosicrucians studied in closed chambers by candlelight? The name of this text is the Kybalion, and the principle it describes, the principle of vibration, is not a New Age metaphor. It is a law that, when you truly understand it, completely transforms what it means to see 444 repeatedly in your life. Stay until the end, because what you are about to discover here will not comfort you the way you expect, but it will give you something infinitely more valuable than comfort. It will give you clarity. Before anything else, we need to destroy the myth. Not with arrogance, mainly in the 1980s and 1990s, popularized by an author named Doreen Virtue, who later publicly renounced all this angelic numerology upon converting to evangelical Christianity. The creator of the system herself said that what she taught was incompatible with deeper spiritual truths. But the system had already taken on a life of its own. Today, if you search any sequence of numbers, 11, 11, 22, 22, 3, 3, 3, 4, 4, 4, you find a ready-made angelic answer wrapped in positivity and same-day delivery. This is not wisdom. It is spiritual fast food. The true esoteric tradition, the one that spanned millennia, that influenced Pythagoras, Plato, the Hebrew Kabbalists, the Gnostics of Nag Hammadi, the Renaissance alchemists, and the early philosophers of quantum physics, was never this simple. It never promised instant comfort. It promised something much more radical: initiation, and initiation hurts before it liberates. So let us go to the principle, the Hermetic Principle of Vibration. The Kybalion was published in 1908 by an author who identified themselves only as 3 initiates. Later researchers identified the text as a systematization of much older Hermetic teachings, whose origin dates back to the Corpus Hermeticum, a collection of philosophical and theological treatises attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great, a syncretic figure who merged the Egyptian god Thoth with the Greek god Hermes, forming the patron of all occult knowledge. The Corpus Hermeticum, as we know it, was rediscovered in the West in 1462, when an agent of Cosimo de Medici brought it from Macedonia to Florence. Cosimo was so unsettled by the importance of the text that he ordered his translator, Marsilio Ficino, to interrupt the translation of Plato, the greatest Greek philosopher, to translate Hermes first. He felt that Hermes was more urgent. Within this tradition, there are 7 principles that govern all reality, 7 universal laws. The third of them is the principle of vibration. And the Kybalion states it like this: nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. 3 sentences. But these 3 sentences contain one of the most radical assertions ever made about the nature of the universe. Let us unpack this slowly, because here is where most people make the mistake of treating vibration as a positive metaphor, as if vibrating high were just an elegant way of saying you are happy. No, vibration in the Hermetic sense is literal. It is physics, it is mathematics. Hermes Trismegistus taught that the difference between a stone and a thought is not one of substance, it is one of frequency. The stone vibrates at frequencies so low that they seem static. A thought vibrates at frequencies so high that they seem immaterial, but both are on the same spectrum of vibration. Matter is spirit vibrated slowly. Spirit is matter vibrated above the threshold of sensory perception. This was written centuries before Einstein demonstrated with E equals mc squared that matter and energy are the same thing in different states. Centuries before Max Planck declared that matter, at its most fundamental level, does not exist. There is only vibration. In 1918, a year before he died, Planck said at a conference in Florence, the same city where the corpus hermeticum was rediscovered centuries earlier, that a physicist of his generation had to accept that matter itself is not the foundation of reality. What sustains matter is a force behind which we must postulate the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. A conscious and intelligent mind. The founder of quantum mechanics described the universe exactly as Hermes Trismegistus described it 2,000 years earlier. Now the number begins to make sense, but we are not there yet. We need one more step. The principle of vibration does not just state that everything vibrates. It states that vibration can be altered, accelerated, decelerated, and transmuted. And the Kybalion goes even deeper. It states that there is a form of vibration that works like a portal, a specific frequency where the barrier between the dense world and the subtle world thins. The Hermetists called this state the 0 point of polarization. It is the point where opposites meet, where the visible and the invisible, the conscious and the unconscious, time and eternity touch each other. And within the Gnostic tradition, especially in the Apocryphon of John, one of the texts found in Nag Hammadi in 1945, this point is described as the place where the pneuma, the divine spirit imprisoned in matter, can hear the call of the pleroma, the divine fullness beyond the archons. The Gnostics believed that most human beings are immersed in a state of agnosia, ignorance, not intellectual ignorance, but ontological ignorance, a structural blindness to the nature of what you truly are, and that certain beings, the pneumatics, carry a divine spark that can be activated when the right frequency reaches them. This is the context in which 444 must be understood, not as a love note from an angel, as an activation frequency. Let us talk about numbers now, not popular numerology, sacred mathematics, the way ancient traditions used numbers not as decorative symbols, but as mappings of structures of reality. The number 4 in the Pythagorean and Hermetic tradition represents the totality of the manifested world. Pythagoras called 4 the tetrad, and to him the tetrad was sacred because it represented the completeness of the physical cosmos. 4 cardinal points, 4 elements, 4 dimensions of space-time, height, width, depth, and time. 4 is the number of structure. It is the number that gives form to the formless. But why 3 fours? Why 4, 4, 4, and not just 4? In sacred geometry, the triad, the grouping of 3, is not a repetition. It is an amplification in geometric progression. 1 4 is structure. 2 4s is structure upon structure. 3 4s is the complete structure in its 3 dimensions of manifestation: the physical plane, the mental plane, and the spiritual plane. The Kybalion describes this using the principle of correspondence, the second Hermetic principle, as above, so below, as within, so without, as in the great, so in the small. 4, 4, 4 is the perfect correspondence, the same structure replicated across the 3 planes. It is the symbol of a complete alignment between what you are materially, what you are mentally, and what you are spiritually. But here is where this goes beyond any angelic description. This alignment is not a message that you have already arrived. It is a sign that you are on the threshold, and the threshold is the most dangerous and most promising place there is. Think of a radio frequency. When you turn the dial and the dial is almost on the station, you hear static, a white noise that contains fragments of something you do not hear clearly, but the signal is there. You are on the threshold of tuning in. 1 more millimeter and the voice becomes crystal clear. 4, 4, 4 is that millimeter before crystallizing. And that is why when you begin to see this sequence frequently, you also begin to notice other things, a sense of restlessness you cannot name, synchronicities that seem too unlikely to be coincidence, questions that rise to the surface uninvited, a discomfort with answers that used to satisfy you. This discomfort is not noise, it is the signal coming in stronger. Now let us move to something that practically no spiritual channel mentions. Why? Because it requires you to study. It requires you to spend time with difficult texts, and difficult texts do not go viral. In the Corpus Hermeticum, specifically in the treatise called Poimandres, the first and most important treatise of the collection, Hermes describes a cosmogonic vision, a revelation about how the universe was created and how human consciousness reached the state it is in. Hermes sees a being of light, the divine mind, and this mind explains that everything that exists is made of two primordial elements, light and darkness, fire and pneuma, fire and breath, and that the human being received a gift that no other creature received, the capacity to know both, to inhabit both realms simultaneously. But this gift came with a condition. To inhabit the dense world, human consciousness had to clothe itself in layers that Hermes calls veils. Each veil is an obstacle to the perception of what is below or above the visible surface. The Gnostics called these veils archons. The Buddhists call them Maya. The Platonists call them the shadows of the cave. And the function of an activation frequency like 444 is, according to Hermetic tradition, to resonate with the deepest layer of you, the layer that is not covered by the veils, the spark that the Gnostics called pneuma and that the Hermetists called nous, the divine mind imprisoned in matter. When this resonance happens, one of the layers begins to vibrate differently. It does not disappear, but it becomes less opaque. It is like placing a candle behind a paper. The paper does not vanish, but you begin to see the light through it. This is the real mechanism behind 444. It is not an angel sending you a message. It is you, the part of you that exists on a higher plane of vibration, trying to communicate something to the part of you that exists here, on this dense plane. You are having a conversation with yourself, but the you that is transmitting is so much broader than the you that is receiving that it seems to come from the outside. This is not comforting philosophy. This is technically more disturbing than the angelic explanation, because the angelic explanation puts you in a passive position. Something loves you and protects you. The Hermetic explanation puts you in an active and responsible position. You are the source. You are the transmitter and the receiver. And if you do not decode the message correctly, it will keep coming, stronger, more urgent, until you pay attention. Now we need to talk about what it means to pay attention the way the Hermetic tradition teaches. Because most people who see 444 do one of three things. They photograph the clock and post it on social media, they go to Google and read about angels, or they ignore it completely. None of these responses is what the frequency is asking for. The Kybalion dedicates an entire section to what it calls mental transmutation, and the premise is direct. An initiate is not a person who passively receives revelations. An initiate is a person who has learned to work with vibration consciously and deliberately. Hermes Trismegistus used the example of the lyre. A lyre has strings. Each string, when plucked, produces a specific note, but the lyre does not produce music by itself. It needs a musician who understands the relationships between the notes, harmony, counterpoint, tension, and resolution. The vibration of 444 is a string being plucked. The question that the Hermetic tradition poses is not, what message does this note carry? The question is, what response will you create? Because the response you create determines the next frequency you emit, and the frequency you emit attracts the experiences that correspond to it. This is the principle of attraction in the Hermetic sense. Not the law of attraction of pop culture, which was hollowed out until it became a motivational poster, but the precise mechanism of vibrational correspondence described 2,000 years ago. You do not attract what you want, you attract what you are vibrationally. And 444 is signaling a moment when you are vibrating at a transitional frequency. You are no longer who you were, you are not yet who you are becoming. And this transition zone is incredibly productive if you are conscious of it, and incredibly disorienting if you are not. Many people who go through this period report specific things: the end of relationships that seemed permanent but that were actually holding you in a frequency you outgrew. The emergence of talents that had never appeared before, as if a floodgate had been opened. A growing intolerance for environments and conversations that previously seemed neutral, and that now seem literally heavy, as if the air became more dense in those spaces. And a powerful attraction to certain ideas, texts, places, or people, which can only be described as recognition, not discovery, recognition. This last one is the most significant for the Gnostic tradition. In the Gospel of Philip, one of the Nag Hammadi texts, there is a statement that spent centuries buried in the sand of the Egyptian desert. Light and darkness, life and death, right and left are brothers of one another. It is impossible to separate one from the other. Because of this, the good are not good, the evil things are not evil, life is not life, death is not death. What Philip is describing, encoded in Gnostic language, is the same that the Kybalion describes as the principle of polarity. Everything has two poles. Every opposite is the same in nature, differing only in degree. And the function of a vibrational initiation is to raise consciousness to the point where you perceive this, where you stop reacting mechanically to the two poles and begin to operate from the central point, the point that the Hermetists called the axis. The place from which you can see and understand both sides without being swept away by either of them. 444 is signaling you are getting close to the axis, but getting close is not arriving, and this difference is where most people stumble. Because getting close to the axis intensifies both sides before transcending them. Emotions become more intense. The patterns you tried to overcome reappear with greater strength. The doubts you thought you had resolved return, deeper and more uncomfortable than before. It is like climbing a mountain. When you are at the base, you do not see the storm that is halfway up the climb. When you begin to climb and enter the storm, you might think you took the wrong path. But the storm is not a sign of error. It is a sign of altitude. Hermes Trismegistus in the treatise Asclepius, another text from the Corpus Hermeticum, describes what happens when a pneumatic, a being who carries the divine spark, begins to awaken. He uses a Greek word that is almost untranslatable, epignosis. It is not just knowledge, it is a knowledge that recognizes, that identifies something that was already there, but was hidden. Epignosis is what happens when you see 444 and feel that there is something more than a coincidence, but you cannot name exactly what. This something more that you feel but cannot yet articulate is epignosis beginning to function. It is recognition waking up. Most people in this moment seek the answer outside, on Google, on a YouTube channel, from a spiritual guru, and they find the angelic answer. And the angelic answer is satisfactory enough to shut down the search. But the question that the Hermetic tradition poses is, what happens if you do not shut down the search? What happens if you remain with the discomfort of not knowing, with the open question, without plugging the hole with a quick answer? The Kybalion has a name for this state, the mind that seeks. And it asserts that the mind that seeks emits a specific frequency, a frequency of openness that corresponds vibrationally to a certain quality of experiences, encounters, and revelations. In other words, keeping the question open is in itself a vibrational act, and keeping the question open about 444 instead of closing it with the guardian angel's answer might be exactly what the sequence is asking for. Not the answer, the question. Now let us talk about something that will sound radical, but that is supported by history. Throughout the centuries, initiatory traditions, Hermetic, Gnostic, Kabbalistic, Orphic, kept esoteric knowledge in secret not out of arbitrary elitism, but for a very specific reason. They believed that certain knowledge could only be understood and not just consumed by those who had already gone through a process of vibrational preparation. A text exposed to someone whose vibrational field is not prepared to receive it not only has no effect, it causes harm, not physical harm. Harm in the sense that the person will use that knowledge to reinforce the patterns that it was supposed to dissolve. The clearest example is the principle of attraction itself when misunderstood. In the hands of someone who has not gone through hermetic preparation, it becomes a tool of ego, an argument that if I don't have money, it's because my vibration is low. If you are sick, it's because you attracted the disease. This is not Hermetism. This is narcissism disguised as spirituality. Genuine Hermetism begins with the principle of mentalism. The all is mind. The universe exists within an infinite mind, and each conscious being is an expression of that mind. This means that the problem of human suffering is not a matter of insufficient personal vibration. It is a matter of perceived separation. The illusion that you are an isolated being, separated from the all, fighting against an indifferent universe. Hermetic initiation does not teach you to ask for more from the universe. It teaches you to recognize that you and the universe are made of the same substance, and that when you operate from this perception, your relationship with reality changes fundamentally, not because the universe becomes friendlier, but because you stop being at war with it. This is the knowledge that 444 is pointing to. It is not a note saying that you are protected. It is a reminder that you are part of what protects. Let us now go to the mathematical aspect of 444 that almost nobody mentions. 444 in numerology reduces as follows. 4 plus 4 plus 4 equals 12. 12 equals 1 plus 2 equals 3. 3 is the base number of 444. In the Pythagorean tradition, 3 is the number of synthesis. Thesis and antithesis produce synthesis. The father and the mother produce the child. The past and the future produce the present. The two always produces a third element that transcends and contains them. But in the Hermetic tradition, 3 has an additional dimension. The very name of Hermes Trismegistus means Hermes the thrice great. And this title referred to the 3 forms of knowledge that he mastered. Theurgy, working with divine forces, astrology, understanding cosmic correspondences, and alchemy, the transmutation of matter and spirit. 3 domains that together form a complete knowledge of reality in its 3 planes: the divine, the celestial, and the terrestrial. 444 reduced to 3 is, therefore, a correspondence with Hermes Trismegistus, with the archetype of the thrice great, with the guardian of the knowledge that crosses the 3 planes. It is not a guardian angel, it is the guardian of the threshold, what the Greeks called the psychopomp, the guide of souls between worlds. Hermes, in Greek mythology, was the only god who could move freely between Olympus, Earth, and Hades, without restrictions, without toll. 444 is the vibrational signature of the threshold, of the in-between, of the space between worlds, and you are receiving this signature because some part of you is also learning to transit, not to get trapped on either side. Now, a question that needs to be asked: why do certain people see 444 frequently and others never notice? The Hermetic answer is not that certain people are special or chosen by some external god. The answer is more subtle and more honest. The pattern is available to everyone. The question is, who is tuned in to perceive it? In the principle of vibration, the perception of a pattern requires the observer to be vibrationally close to the frequency of that pattern. It is like that radio analogy. You do not catch a jazz station if your radio is tuned to AM, not because the jazz station does not exist, but because you are on another frequency. Seeing 444 repeatedly indicates that your vibrational frequency is close to the frequency of this pattern. And this pattern, as we established, is the frequency of the threshold, of transition, of alignment between the 3 planes. This is not a distinction of value. It does not mean you are better than someone who does not see it. It means you are in a specific phase of a process. Others are in other phases. Each phase has its own signature, But if you are in this phase, the phase of 444, there is something that the Hermetic tradition recommends doing with it. Not photographing and posting, not reading the angel's answer and reassuring yourself, but working with it. Working with a frequency means, in Hermetic vocabulary, creating conditions for the resonance to deepen, so that the signal coming from your highest dimension can be received with more clarity. And the Kybalion describes 3 practices that amplify this. The first is deliberate silence. Not necessarily formal meditation, but regular periods of quietude where you stop feeding the flow of external stimuli and stay with what emerges from within. Most people are afraid of silence because in silence the questions appear that they avoid. But it is exactly those questions that 444 is trying to bring to the surface. The second is what the Kybalion calls the control of mental vibration, the practice of observing your mental states without being completely absorbed by them. The Hermetists had a specific exercise for this. When you notice an intense emotion, instead of either expressing it or repressing it, you name it out loud, preferably to yourself, and try to identify its opposite pole. Anger, the opposite pole is serenity. Fear, the opposite pole is confidence. By identifying the 2 poles, you position yourself on the axis between them at the 0 point of polarization. The third is the study of primary texts, not YouTube summaries, not TikTok summaries, the texts, the Kybalion, the Corpus Hermeticum, the Gospel of Philip, the Apocryphon of John, the Pistis Sophia. These texts are difficult on purpose. The difficulty is part of the initiation mechanism. The cognitive effort they require is itself a vibrational practice, an exercise in raising the frequency of thought to the point where the text begins to reveal layers that are not visible upon first reading. Every esoteric text has at least 3 layers: the literal, the allegorical, and the anagogical. The anagogical layer, the deepest, only opens for someone who has already worked through the first 2. And working through the first 2 requires time, effort, and the willingness not to know, to remain in the question, to resist the temptation of quick understanding. It is the opposite of everything the internet has taught us to do, and perhaps that is why this knowledge survived, because it resists fast processing, because it cannot be turned into a 15-second reel without completely losing its substance. Let us go to the final moment. You made it this far in this video. That means something, not in a mystical way, in a very practical way. Most people who click on a video about 444 want the angel version. They want the answer that closes the matter with a pretty bow. When they realize that this video is not going to deliver that, they leave. You stayed, which means some part of you recognizes that the more difficult question is also the truer one. That is epignosis. It is recognition, not of the information, of the process. Hermes Trismegistus, in the last paragraph of the Poimandres, after receiving the complete cosmogonic revelation, does something that is so small that it is easy to miss. He descends. He goes to ordinary human beings. He does not stay in the ecstasy of the revelation. He comes back. And the reason he comes back is that in the Hermetic system, knowledge that does not return to the world is not knowledge. It is escape. The enlightenment that hides from itself in spiritual ecstasy is another form of falling asleep. 444 is not calling you to leave the world. It is calling you to be more fully present in it, with more clarity, with more intention, with the perception, even if partial, that the material reality you inhabit is at the same time completely real and completely vibrational, and that you have influence over it not by wishing it different, but by being different. Being different begins with thinking different. Thinking different begins with asking different questions. And asking different questions begins with refusing easy answers. You started this process today. The signal had been coming for some time. Today, for the first time, you heard it with more clarity than noise. The string of the lyre was plucked. The note is in the air. There is a detail that Hermes Trismegistus mentions almost in passing in the Poimandres, and that most modern translations do not emphasize enough. After descending among human beings and beginning to transmit what he learned, he describes that some listened and paid attention, and others laughed. Some turned their backs, some confronted him, And he kept speaking, not because he expected to convert everyone, but because he understood that the frequency he transmitted, regardless of who received it consciously, kept vibrating. A plucked string keeps resonating even when the musician stops playing it. The sound propagates. It finds walls, surfaces, other strings. And some of these other strings, upon absorbing the vibration, begin to resonate too, in a phenomenon that physicists call sympathetic resonance. You can be one of those strings, not because someone chose you from the outside, but because the frequency found in you the right correspondence to resonate. 444 will return, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, maybe in a completely unexpected context. When it returns, you will already know it is not an accident, it is not an angel sending hugs, it is the vibrational universe, which is the only universe that exists, telling you that the process continues and that you are finally paying attention the right way.